The crack of a whip shattered the morning stillness as Temperance Aldridge stood firm against the bucking bronco that had sent 4 men to the infirmary in the last month alone. Sweat beaded on her brow, the Nevada sun beating down mercilessly as dust clouds rose around her, and the massive black stallion that everyone in Hawthorne had deemed untamable. The year was 1879, and Hawthorne, Nevada, was nothing more than a dusty waypoint between the silver mines of Virginia City and the cattle ranches that stretched across the high desert. Most folks were just passing through, stopping only long enough to water their horses and replenish supplies before moving on to more promising territories. But Temperance had called this place home for nearly all her 22 years, and she wasn't about to let some horse, no matter how wild, get the best of her. From his perch on the top rail of the corral fence, Tom Jenkins watched with an intensity that made the other onlookers shift uncomfortably. His steel-blue eyes never left the woman in the center of the pen, her slender form belying the strength it took to hold onto that midnight beast. Tom had been in town less than a week, hired on as the new foreman at the Thompson Ranch, but he'd heard all about the stallion they called Diablo and how not a single man had been able to break him. "She's wasting her time," muttered Silas Caldwell, the livery stable owner. "That horse is the devil himself. Already broke Jim Harrison's arm and nearly trampled young Pete Wilson to death." Tom didn't bother responding. His attention remained fixed on the dance unfolding before him, the woman with the fiery determination and the horse with fury in its eyes. Temperance had been working with Diablo for 2 weeks now, approaching him differently than the men had. Where they'd tried to dominate with brute force, she used patience. Where they'd been quick to anger, she remained calm. But today was the true test, the first time she'd attempt to ride him. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the snorting and stamping. "I know you're scared. I know they hurt you, but I'm not them." The stallion's ears flicked back and forth, his massive body trembling with untapped energy as she slowly, carefully positioned herself. In one fluid motion, she swung onto his back. For a breathless second, nothing happened. Then hell broke loose. Diablo exploded into motion, bucking and twisting, his powerful body contorting in ways that defied nature. The crowd gasped collectively, several men looking away, unable to watch what they were certain would be another painful defeat, but Tom couldn't tear his eyes away. The woman moved with the horse, anticipating each buck, each twist. Her body flowed like water, adapting to every violent movement. Her honey-brown hair had come loose from its practical braid, flying around her face like a golden halo. "Stay with him, Temp," shouted an older man at the edge of the corral. Her father, Russell Aldridge, Tom presumed. For what seemed like an eternity, Temperance and Diablo battled for dominance. Then gradually the bucking began to subside. The horse's breaths came in heavy snorts, his sides heaving, but the violent resistance was ebbing. Temperance continued to speak to him, words too soft for anyone else to hear, her hands steady on the reins. And then, miraculously, Diablo was cantering around the corral, still high-spirited but no longer trying to unseat his rider. Temperance guided him in a circle, then a figure 8 demonstrating control that had the onlookers murmuring in disbelief. Tom felt something shift inside him, a recognition, perhaps, or something deeper. He'd spent 15 years working with horses across the Western Territories, from Texas to Montana, and he'd never seen anything like what he'd just witnessed. When Temperance finally dismounted, patting Diablo's sweaty neck and feeding him an apple from her pocket, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Money changed hands as bets were settled, and Russell Aldridge beamed with paternal pride. Tom remained on the fence, watching as she led the now docile stallion to the water trough. Only when the excitement had died down and most of the spectators had dispersed did he drop down into the corral and approach her. "That was something else," he said, keeping his voice low so as not to startle the horse. "I've never seen anyone gentle a horse quite like that." Temperance looked up, really noticing him for the first time. Her eyes were the color of whiskey in sunlight, amber with flecks of gold, and they assessed him with the same careful attention she'd given the horse. "Thank you," she replied simply, continuing to stroke Diablo's neck. He just needed someone to understand him rather than try to break him. "Tom Jenkins," he offered, extending his hand but careful to maintain a respectful distance from the horse. "New foreman at Thompson's place." "Temperance Aldridge," she responded, briefly clasping his calloused hand with her equally work-roughened one. "Though most folks call me Temp." "Your father runs the smithy, I hear," she nodded, "and I help with the horses, always have had a way with them, even the difficult ones." "Difficult?" Tom couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. That's quite the understatement for this fellow. For the first time, Temperance smiled, and Tom felt another shift inside him, stronger this time. The smile transformed her face from merely pretty to something that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "Diablo's had a hard life," she explained, her expression softening as she looked at the massive black horse. "Caught wild up in the mountains, handled roughly by men who saw only dollar signs when they looked at him. He doesn't trust easily." "Smart animal," Tom commented, and he meant it. "Trust has to be earned." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. "You know horses." It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "Spent most of my life around them. Started working ranch jobs when I was 14 after my parents died. Been doing it ever since." Temperance seemed to consider this information, then asked, "What brings you to Hawthorne? Not much happens here." "That's precisely why I came," Tom answered honestly. "Had enough excitement to last a lifetime, thought a quiet place might be a nice change." Before Temperance could respond, her father called to her from the smithy across the road. "Temp, need your help with Mrs. Holloway's mare." "Coming, Pa," she called back. Turning to Tom, she added, "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Jenkins." "Tom," he corrected. "And likewise, Miss Aldridge." "Temperance," she countered with another smile. "Or Temp. Miss Aldridge makes me sound like a schoolmarm." With that, she led Diablo out of the corral and toward the larger paddock behind the blacksmith's shop, leaving Tom standing there with the inexplicable feeling that something significant had just occurred, though he couldn't have said exactly what. Over the next few weeks, Tom settled into his role at the Thompson Ranch. The work was hard but straightforward, managing the hands, overseeing the cattle, ensuring that the operation ran smoothly. Samuel Thompson was a fair employer, more interested in results than how Tom achieved them, which suited him just fine. But Tom found himself riding into town more often than strictly necessary, always with some flimsy pretext: supplies needed, messages to deliver, equipment to be repaired at the blacksmith's. The truth, which he was reluctantly beginning to acknowledge to himself, was that he hoped to catch glimpses of Temperance Aldridge working with horses in the corral adjacent to her father's smithy. Sometimes he'd find her there, and they'd exchange pleasantries. Occasionally, she'd show him a particularly difficult horse she was working with, and he'd offer observations or suggestions which she would consider thoughtfully, implementing those she found useful. They developed an easy rapport based on their shared love of horses and understanding of their nature. It was during one such visit, nearly a month after he'd first watched her tame Diablo, that Tom arrived to find Russell Aldridge alone at the forge, hammering a red-hot piece of metal into shape. "Afternoon, Mr. Aldridge," Tom called over the rhythmic clanging. The older man looked up, wiping sweat from his brow with a soot-stained forearm. "Jenkins," he acknowledged with a nod. "If you're looking for Temp, she's out at the Thompson place." Tom frowned in confusion. "At the ranch." "What for?" "Samuel sent word this morning. Got a new stallion delivered yesterday that's giving them fits. Asked if Temp could come take a look." Tom felt a flicker of annoyance that Thompson hadn't mentioned this to him before he'd ridden into town, but it was quickly replaced by concern. "What kind of horse?" "Thoroughbred from back east, I gather. Some fancy breeding stock Thompson bought sight unseen. Apparently it's been raising hell since it arrived." Russell set down his hammer and fixed Tom with a penetrating stare. "You didn't know about this?" "No," Tom admitted. "I left early this morning to pick up supplies. Thompson must have sent for her after I'd gone." Russell grunted, returning to his work. "Well, you'd best get back then. Temp can handle herself, but that doesn't stop me from worrying." Tom needed no further prompting. He was back on his horse and galloping toward the ranch within minutes, an inexplicable sense of urgency driving him. It wasn't that he doubted Temperance's abilities, quite the contrary. He'd seen firsthand what she could accomplish with even the most challenging horses. But something about the situation didn't sit right with him. When he arrived at the ranch, he found a small crowd gathered around the breaking corral. In the center stood Temperance, facing off against a magnificent chestnut stallion with a wild gleam in its eye. The horse was larger than Diablo, with powerful hindquarters that spoke of its thoroughbred bloodlines, but there was something else, a meanness in its expression that Tom recognized immediately. This wasn't just a frightened or untrusting animal. This was a horse that had learned to hate. "How long has this been going on?" Tom asked, dismounting beside Ethan Miller, one of the ranch hands. "About an hour," Miller replied, not taking his eyes off the scene. "She's good, I'll give her that. Already got closer to him than any of us managed." Tom scanned the faces around the corral until he spotted Samuel Thompson standing off to one side, his expression a mixture of concern and impatience. Tom made his way over to his employer. "Mr. Thompson," he said tersely, "why wasn't I informed about this?" The older man had the grace to look slightly abashed. "You were already gone, Jenkins, and time was of the essence. That animal injured 2 hands yesterday, and I need him serviceable. The Aldridge girl has a reputation." "Her name is Temperance," Tom corrected, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "And that horse isn't just difficult, he's dangerous. Look at his eyes." Thompson squinted toward the corral. "He's a prime specimen. Cost me a small fortune to have him shipped from Kentucky. Supposedly from the finest racing stock. I don't care if he's descended from Man o' War himself," Tom muttered, "though the famous racehorse wouldn't be born for another 30 years. Something's not right with him." In the corral, Temperance was working methodically, using a long lead rope to establish boundaries with the stallion, who watched her with wary hostility. Tom could see she was being extremely careful, never turning her back, always maintaining awareness of the horse's position. For nearly another hour, Tom watched as Temperance patiently worked to gain the stallion's trust. She made progress, getting close enough to touch his neck briefly before he shied away, but Tom could see the horse was merely tolerating her, not accepting her. And tolerance could turn to violence in an instant. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when disaster struck. One of the younger ranch hands, bored with the slow progress, tossed a pebble that clattered against the corral fence. The sound was small, but it was enough. The stallion exploded into motion, rearing up with a shriek of rage, massive hooves pawing the air directly above Temperance. Tom was moving before he consciously decided to, vaulting the fence and sprinting across the corral. He reached Temperance just as the stallion came down, shoving her roughly aside and narrowly avoiding being struck himself. The horse wheeled and charged, and Tom had only seconds to grab Temperance's fallen rope and swing it in a wide arc, creating enough space for them to back toward the fence. "Get out," he told her urgently, his eyes never leaving the agitated stallion. "I can handle this," she insisted, though her voice shook slightly. "Not today, you can't," Tom replied, continuing to move them backward. "That horse is beyond reason right now. We need to give him space." For a moment he thought she might argue, but then she nodded tersely and allowed him to guide her to the fence, which they quickly climbed. Only when they were safely on the other side did Tom release the breath he'd been holding. Thompson approached, his face dark with anger, though whether at them or the horse, Tom couldn't tell. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson," Temperance said, still slightly breathless. "I was making progress, but he's been mistreated. Badly. It's going to take more than one session to gain his trust." "I paid good money for that animal," Thompson growled. If he can't be broken, he's not a thing to be broken, Tom interrupted, surprising himself with his vehemence. He's an animal that's been hurt and confused by people who should have treated him better. Thompson's eyes narrowed dangerously. Watch your tone, Jenkins. I'm still your employer. And I'm still your foreman, which means part of my job is advising you on matters concerning this ranch. That horse needs time and special handling. Miss Aldridge is right, it won't happen in a day. For a long moment, the tension stretched between them. Then Thompson's shoulders slumped slightly. Fine. What do you suggest? Tom glanced at Temperance, who was watching the stallion pace the corral. Miss Aldridge has a gift with difficult horses. If she's willing, I'd suggest she work with him regularly under controlled conditions, with proper safety measures. Temperance turned to face them, her eyes meeting Tom's briefly before addressing Thompson. I'd be willing to try, Mr. Thompson. But as Tom says, it will take time and there are no guarantees. That horse has suffered and some wounds don't heal easily. Thompson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. What would your fee be? Temperance named a figure that seemed reasonable to Tom but clearly gave Thompson pause. After some negotiation, they settled on an arrangement. Temperance would come to the ranch 3 times a week to work with the stallion, with payment contingent on progress made. As the details were being finalized, Tom stepped away to check on the horse, which had calmed somewhat and was now standing in a corner of the corral, still alert but no longer in a frenzy. There was intelligence in those eyes, Tom noted, and pain. When Temperance finished her discussion with Thompson, she joined Tom at the fence. They stood in silence for a moment watching the chestnut stallion. Thank you, she said finally, for stepping in back there. Tom shrugged. You'd have managed, maybe, maybe not. She turned to face him, her expression serious. But I appreciate it all the same. The late afternoon sun caught in her hair, illuminating strands of gold and copper among the brown, and Tom was struck again by how beautiful she was, not in the delicate way of Eastern ladies with their parasols and corsets, but in a manner that belonged to this wild country. Strong, resilient, unaffected. I should get back to town before dark, Temperance said, breaking the moment. Pa will be worrying. I'll ride with you, Tom offered immediately. It's on my way. It wasn't. Really, he was staying at the ranch bunkhouse these days, but he wasn't about to let her ride back alone, especially after the day's events. To his relief, she accepted without argument. As they rode side by side down the dusty road that led toward Hawthorne, the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Tom found himself talking more than he usually did. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to influenza when he was 13, about making his way west with nothing but determination and a knack for handling horses. In return, Temperance shared stories of her own childhood in Hawthorne, of learning horseshoeing from her father after her mother died in childbirth when Temperance was just 8, of finding solace in the company of horses when human companionship proved complicated or disappointing. People always want something from you, she observed as they crested a small rise that gave them a view of Hawthorne in the distance. Horses just want to be understood. Some people are like that too, Tom ventured. Just wanting to be understood, I mean. Temperance glanced at him, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Are you one of those people, Tom Jenkins? He chuckled, surprising himself. Maybe, wouldn't know how to tell you if I was, though. That's all right, she replied, her smile widening. I'm pretty good at figuring out the difficult ones. The double meaning wasn't lost on him, and he felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. By the time they reached the blacksmith shop in Hawthorne, twilight was deepening into night, and oil lamps glowed in windows along the town's single main street. Russell Aldridge was waiting on the porch, pipe in hand, his expression relaxing visibly when he spotted them. There you are, he called as they dismounted. Was beginning to think I'd have to come looking for you. Sorry, Pa, Temperance said, approaching to kiss his weathered cheek. It took longer than I expected with that new horse at Thompson's. Nasty piece of work, is he?" Russell asked, eyeing Tom curiously. "He's been through a lot," Tom replied diplomatically, "but your daughters agreed to work with him." Russell nodded slowly, his gaze moving between Tom and Temperance with the shrewd assessment of a man who'd spent decades reading people as well as he read horses. "Well, come on in, both of you. Least I can do is offer you some supper after your long day." Tom began to demur, but Temperance caught his eye with a look that clearly said he should accept, so he did. The meal was simple but hearty: venison stew, cornbread, and strong black coffee, and the conversation flowed easily among the three of them. Russell proved to be as knowledgeable about horses as his daughter, and Tom found himself engaged in the kind of talk that fed his soul as much as the stew fed his body. It was fully dark when Tom finally took his leave, promising to meet Temperance at the ranch for her first official session with the chestnut stallion in 2 days' time. As he mounted his horse for the ride back, Temperance walked him to the edge of the property. "I enjoyed this evening," she said, her voice soft in the darkness. "Thank you again for your help today." "My pleasure," Tom replied, and meant it. "Be careful with that horse, Temperance. There's something in him that worries me." She looked up at him, her expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "Are you concerned for me, Mr. Jenkins?" "Maybe I am," he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. "Would that be so terrible?" Temperance considered this for a moment, then shook her head slowly. "No, not terrible, just unexpected." "Good night, Temperance," he said, tipping his hat before turning his horse toward the ranch. "Good night, Tom," she called after him, and he carried the sound of his name on her lips all the way back to the bunkhouse. True to her word, Temperance arrived at the Thompson Ranch 2 days later, prepared for her first proper session with the chestnut stallion. Tom had taken precautions, reinforcing the corral and ensuring there would be no distractions or sudden noises to startle the horse. He'd also taken the liberty of learning what he could about the animal's history from the driver who delivered him. "His name's Firecracker," Tom informed Temperance as they approached the corral together. "Bred for racing but was too aggressive for the track. Changed hands several times before Thompson bought him." Temperance nodded, absorbing this information. "That explains a lot. Race training can be brutal if done wrong, and changing owners repeatedly would only compound his confusion and mistrust." The stallion watched their approach warily from the far side of the corral, his ears pinned back and nostrils flared. Tom had made sure he was well fed and watered that morning, hoping a full belly might improve his temperament, but Firecracker still radiated dangerous energy. "I'll be right here the whole time," Tom assured her as she prepared to enter the corral. "Just say the word and I'll distract him if needed." Temperance smiled at his concern. "I'll be careful. But remember, horses can sense fear and tension. If you're worried, he'll pick up on it." Tom nodded, forcing himself to relax his posture and slow his breathing. He remained outside the fence but positioned himself where he could intervene quickly if necessary. Over the next hour, he watched as Temperance worked with a patience that bordered on miraculous. She didn't try to approach Firecracker directly. Instead, she simply existed in the same space with him, occasionally speaking in low, soothing tones, but mostly just allowing the horse to become accustomed to her presence without pressure or demands. By the end of the session, Firecracker had stopped pacing and was watching her with what appeared to be cautious curiosity rather than outright hostility. He still wouldn't allow her to touch him, but he did accept an apple from her outstretched hand, snatching it quickly before retreating to a safe distance. "That's progress," Tom observed as Temperance exited the corral. "It's a start," she agreed, wiping dust from her hands onto her skirt. "He's intelligent, which is both good and bad. Good because he can learn to trust, but bad because he's learned to be suspicious first." "Sounds like people I know," Tom commented wryly. Temperance gave him a penetrating look. "Including yourself," he chuckled, not denying it. "Maybe especially myself." "Well," she said with a small smile, "I suppose I'll have to work on earning your trust too then." Something in her tone made Tom's heart beat a little faster, but before he could respond, Samuel Thompson approached, looking critically at the stallion in the corral. "Doesn't look much different to me," he observed gruffly. "Rome wasn't built in a day, Mr. Thompson," Temperance replied evenly. "And trust isn't built in an hour, but he's listening now, which he wasn't before." Thompson harumphed but didn't argue further. "Jenkins, when you're done here, I need you to check on the north pasture. Miller says the creek's running low and we might need to move the herd." "Yes, sir," Tom acknowledged, his expression neutral despite his annoyance at being summoned away. "I'll see to it directly." After Thompson walked away, Tom turned back to Temperance with an apologetic smile. "Duty calls, I'm afraid. Will you be all right getting back to town?" "I managed just fine before you came along, Tom Jenkins," she reminded him, though her tone held no rebuke. "I'll be here again in 2 days, same time." "I'll make sure I'm available," he promised, and was rewarded with another of those smiles that seemed to brighten the world around her. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. 3 times a week, Temperance would come to work with Firecracker, and Tom would arrange his duties to ensure he could be present for these sessions. The stallion made slow but steady progress under Temperance's patient guidance. By the 3rd week, she was able to touch him freely, and by the 4th, she had introduced a saddle blanket without incident. What Tom hadn't anticipated was how these sessions would affect him. Watching Temperance work her magic with the difficult horse stirred something deep within him: admiration, certainly, but also a growing affection that he found increasingly difficult to ignore. Their conversations before and after each session became the highlights of his week, and he found himself thinking of her at odd moments throughout his days. It wasn't just her way with horses that drew him, though that was remarkable enough. It was her quiet strength, her unflinching honesty, her ability to see the world as it was while still maintaining hope for what it could be. In a land where survival often demanded hardness, Temperance had somehow retained a core of compassion that Tom found both rare and precious. One evening, after a particularly successful session where Firecracker had actually allowed Temperance to sit on his back for a few moments without protest, Tom walked her to her horse, gathering his courage for what he'd been contemplating for days. "There's a social at the church on Saturday," he said, trying to sound casual and probably failing miserably. "Dancing and such. I was wondering if you might like to attend, with me, I mean." Temperance looked at him in surprise, and for a moment Tom feared he'd overstepped. But then she smiled, a hint of color rising in her cheeks. "I'd like that," she said simply. Relief and pleasure washed over him in equal measure. "Good, that's good. I'll come by and pick you up around 6 if that suits." 6 would be perfect, she agreed, mounting her horse with practiced ease. "I look forward to it." As he watched her ride away, Tom realized he was grinning like a fool and didn't care one bit who might see it. Saturday evening arrived clear and mild, the oppressive heat of the day giving way to a pleasant warmth as the sun began its descent. Tom had spent more time than he cared to admit preparing for the evening, bathing in the creek behind the bunkhouse, shaving with extra care, and donning the one good shirt he possessed, freshly laundered for the occasion. When he arrived at the Aldridge home, Russell answered his knock, giving Tom a once-over that was equal parts amusement and appraisal. "Evening, Jenkins," he said, stepping aside to let Tom enter. "Temp's just about ready." The small front room was neat and modestly furnished, with a few personal touches that spoke of the home's inhabitants: a quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair, a shelf of well-worn books, a vase of wildflowers on the small dining table. "Sir," Tom began, feeling it was proper to address the matter directly, "I want you to know my intentions toward your daughter are honorable." Russell regarded him thoughtfully for a moment before breaking into a chuckle. "Son, Temp's been making her own decisions since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. If she's chosen to spend time with you, I reckon she has her reasons, but I appreciate the sentiment all the same." Before Tom could respond, Temperance appeared in the doorway, and all thoughts of proper responses fled his mind. She was wearing a dress of deep blue that complemented her eyes and brought out the honey tones in her hair, which was styled more elaborately than he'd ever seen it, with soft curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," he said, the words emerging before he could think better of them. Temperance's cheeks colored prettily, but she met his gaze with characteristic directness. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Jenkins." The church social was held in the community hall adjacent to Hawthorne's small white chapel. Lanterns and bunting decorated the space, and a small band of local musicians provided lively tunes for dancing. Nearly everyone in town was there, from the youngest children to the oldest grandparents, all taking advantage of one of the few social occasions the isolated community offered. Tom was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered comments their arrival generated. As the new foreman at Thompson's ranch, he was still something of a novelty in town, and Temperance, despite or perhaps because of her unusual talents with horses, seemed to occupy a unique position in the community's social hierarchy. "People are staring," he murmured as he led her toward the refreshment table. "Let them," she replied with a small shrug. "They'll find something new to gossip about by next week." Tom admired her nonchalance, wishing he could share it. He'd never been comfortable being the center of attention, preferring to blend into the background whenever possible. But with Temperance by his side, blending in wasn't an option. The evening progressed pleasantly despite his initial discomfort. They danced several times, Tom discovering to his delight that Temperance moved with the same natural grace on the dance floor as she did in the corral. They conversed with various townspeople, shared punch and cookies from the refreshment table, and gradually, Tom began to relax and enjoy himself. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for some air, walking a short distance from the hall to escape the noise and heat. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust on black velvet, the waning moon providing just enough light to see by. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Tom asked as they strolled slowly alongside the church. "Very much," Temperance answered, her face tilted up to catch the breeze that rustled the leaves of the cottonwood trees lining the street. "It's been a while since I attended one of these gatherings." Tom glanced at her curiously. "Any particular reason?" She hesitated, then said, "Most of the young men in town have either known me since childhood and see me as a sister, or they find my work with horses somewhat disconcerting for a woman." "Their loss," Tom said simply. Temperance stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "Why aren't you disconcerted, Tom? Most men don't appreciate a woman doing what's traditionally considered men's work." Tom considered his answer carefully, wanting to be honest. "I judge people by what they can do, not by what others think they should do. You have a gift with horses that I've never seen equaled man or woman. Why would I be anything but impressed by that?" "That's a refreshingly modern perspective," she observed, studying his face as if searching for something. "Not modern," Tom corrected. "Just practical. Out here, survival depends on everyone contributing what they can. Seems foolish to limit what someone can contribute based on something as arbitrary as whether they're wearing trousers or a skirt." Temperance laughed, the sound bright in the quiet night. "I do like the way you think, Tom Jenkins." Emboldened by her laughter, Tom took a step closer. "And I like the way you are, Temperance Aldridge." The moment stretched between them, laden with possibility. Temperance's smile softened, her eyes reflecting the starlight as she gazed up at him. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished, Tom leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, but when Temperance responded by stepping closer and resting her hands lightly on his chest, Tom deepened it slightly, one hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite tenderness. When they parted, both a little breathless, Tom was pleased to see the smile still playing at the corners of Temperance's mouth. "We should probably return to the social," she said, though she made no move to step away from him. "Probably," Tom agreed, equally stationary. For another moment, they stood close, reluctant to break the spell that seemed to envelop them. Then, with a small sigh, Temperance took his hand and led him back toward the hall, where the music and laughter continued unabated. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur for Tom. They danced several more times, their movements now infused with a new awareness of each other. When he finally escorted her home, the walk seemed both too long and far too short. At her door, Tom took both her hands in his. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said, surprised by the roughness in his voice. "So did I," Temperance replied softly. "May I call on you again? Perhaps Sunday after church." Her smile was answer enough, but she nodded as well. "I'd like that very much." He kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling, before bidding her good night and starting the long walk back to the Thompson ranch, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Over the following weeks, Tom and Temperance's relationship blossomed against the backdrop of their continued work with Firecracker. The stallion was making remarkable progress under Temperance's guidance, now accepting a saddle and bridle and allowing her to ride him for short periods in the corral. Tom had never seen such a transformation in an animal that had initially seemed beyond redemption. Similarly, Tom found himself transformed by his growing relationship with Temperance. They spent as much time together as their respective duties allowed: Sunday afternoons picnicking by the creek, evenings on the Aldridge's porch, even an occasional morning ride when Tom could get away from the ranch early enough. He had never been a particularly talkative man, but with Temperance, conversation flowed easily. They discussed everything from practical matters of horse training to philosophical questions about life and purpose. Russell Aldridge watched their courtship with benign approval, seeming content to see his daughter happy. The townspeople, after the initial flurry of interest, had largely accepted their relationship as unremarkable, though Tom occasionally caught sidelong glances or whispered comments when they were seen together in town. One particularly significant afternoon came when Temperance decided it was time to test Firecracker outside the confines of the corral. Thompson had been pressing for progress, impatient to see some return on his investment, and Temperance felt the stallion was ready for a short, controlled ride in the open. Tom had prepared meticulously for this moment, clearing the area around the corral of anything that might startle the horse and instructing the ranch hands to keep their distance. Still, he couldn't suppress a thread of anxiety as he watched Temperance mount Firecracker in the center of the corral. "Are you certain about this?" he asked one final time. Temperance adjusted her seat, gathering the reins with confident hands. "He's ready, Tom, and so am I." With a nod, Tom opened the corral gate and stood back, every muscle in his body tense as Temperance guided Firecracker through the opening. For a breathless moment, the stallion stood motionless, seeming to process this new freedom. Then, with a delicate precision that belied his massive size, he stepped forward, ears pricked with interest rather than flattened in anger. Temperance guided him in a wide circle around the yard, her posture relaxed but alert. Firecracker moved beautifully, his gait smooth and controlled, responding to her subtle cues with increasing willingness. "He's magnificent," Tom murmured, more to himself than anyone else, and he was. The sunlight caught the chestnut coat, highlighting the play of powerful muscles beneath as the stallion extended into a collected trot. Temperance's face shone with quiet triumph as she directed him through a series of simple patterns, demonstrating the extent of their progress. After about 20 minutes, she guided Firecracker back to the corral, dismounting with a fluid grace that spoke of long practice. The stallion stood quietly as she removed his saddle and bridle, accepting the apple she offered as reward. "That was incredible," Tom said as he closed the gate behind them. "Thompson's going to be pleased. He's a remarkable horse," Temperance replied, her expression softening as she looked at Firecracker. All he needed was someone to listen to him instead of trying to dominate him. Tom's gaze lingered on her face, struck again by the depth of her understanding and compassion. "You're a remarkable woman, Temperance Aldridge." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight. "Careful, Mr. Jenkins. Talk like that might give a girl ideas." "Good," he said simply, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. That evening, after reporting Firecracker's progress to a satisfied Thompson, Tom rode into town, a decision crystallizing in his mind with each mile. He had been considering this step for weeks now, turning it over in his thoughts during long days of ranch work and longer nights in the quiet of the bunkhouse. His destination was the small general store that served as Hawthorne's primary supplier of everything from flour to fabric to firearms. The proprietor, Harold Wilson, looked up from his ledger as Tom entered, nodding in recognition. "Jenkins, what can I do for you this evening?" Tom removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I was wondering if you might have. That is, I'm looking for a ring, an engagement ring." Wilson's bushy eyebrows rose slightly, but he smiled. "For the Aldridge girl, I presume?" News traveled fast in small towns, Tom reflected. "Yes, sir, for Temperance." The shopkeeper nodded thoughtfully, then moved to a small cabinet behind the counter. "Don't keep many such items in stock, as you might imagine. Not much call for them in Hawthorne, but I do have a few pieces that might suit." He unlocked the cabinet and removed a small velvet-lined tray containing several rings. They were simple by Eastern standards, no elaborate diamond settings or ornate metalwork, but each had a quiet beauty that seemed appropriate for a woman like Temperance. Tom examined them carefully, his weathered hands looking oversized and clumsy next to the delicate jewelry. After considerable thought, he selected a slender gold band set with a single small emerald. "This one," he said, his voice gruff with emotion he hadn't anticipated. "How much?" The price Wilson named was substantial, nearly 2 months of Tom's wages as foreman, but he paid it without hesitation, tucking the small box safely into his vest pocket. The next challenge was finding the right moment to propose. Tom wanted it to be perfect, meaningful, but not overly elaborate, or public. Temperance would appreciate sincerity over spectacle, he knew. His opportunity came several days later. Temperance had completed her contracted work with Firecracker, the stallion now manageable enough for the regular ranch hands to exercise daily. Thompson, impressed with the transformation, had offered to purchase Diablo from Russell Aldridge for a generous sum, intending to use both stallions to improve his stock of working horses. To celebrate the successful conclusion of the project, Tom had arranged for them to ride to a particularly beautiful spot he discovered during his rounds of the ranch property, a small meadow beside a clear stream, sheltered by cottonwoods and offering a spectacular view of the distant mountains. The day was perfect, warm but not oppressively hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. They rode side by side, Temperance on her favorite mare, Penny, and Tom on his dependable gelding, Scout. Their conversation flowed easily as always, punctuated by comfortable silences that needed no filling. When they reached the meadow, Tom helped Temperance dismount, though she hardly needed assistance, and they set out the simple picnic he had packed: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of surprisingly good wine that he had purchased specially for the occasion. As they ate, seated on a blanket spread beneath a cottonwood, Tom found himself growing increasingly nervous. The ring box in his pocket seemed to weigh 100 pounds, and his carefully prepared words kept slipping from his mind like water through cupped hands. Temperance, attuned to his moods after their months together, eventually set down her wine glass and fixed him with a searching look. "Tom, what's troubling you? You've been distracted all afternoon." "Not troubled," he corrected hastily. "Just thinking about," she prompted gently. Tom took a deep breath, deciding that the perfect moment was less important than honest feeling. Setting aside his plate, he took her hands in his. "Temperance, These past few months have been the happiest of my life. Before I came to Hawthorne, I was just drifting, doing work I was good at but finding little joy in it. Then I watched you tame that wild horse and something changed in me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Temperance waited patiently, her eyes never leaving his face, her hands warm and steady in his grasp. "I've spent my whole adult life moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. But now, for the first time, I've found someone that feels like home." With fingers that trembled slightly despite his best efforts to control them, Tom reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box. Temperance's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal the emerald ring nestled inside. "I love you, Temperance Aldridge. Your strength, your kindness, your remarkable spirit. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Temperance was silent, her gaze moving from the ring to his face and back again. Then, with a smile that outshone the sun overhead, she nodded. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Tom, I will marry you." Joy surged through him like a physical force. He slipped the ring onto her finger with reverent care, then drew her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and gratitude that filled his heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Temperance rested her forehead against his. "I love you too, you know, have for quite some time now." "Since when?" He couldn't help asking, curiosity mingling with delight. She laughed softly. "Since you jumped that fence to save me from Firecracker, probably. Though I think it started the moment you didn't question my ability to tame Diablo, just stood there watching with respect instead of doubt." Tom shook his head in wonder. "Then you're more perceptive than I am. It took me seeing you work your magic on that wild horse to realize what was happening to my heart." They remained in the meadow until the sun began to lower toward the western mountains, talking of their future together. Tom had saved enough to put a down payment on a small ranch property that had recently come up for sale just outside of Hawthorne, nothing fancy, but with good water rights and enough grazing land for a modest start. With Temperance's skills in horse training and his experience in ranch management, they could build something worthwhile together. "We'll need to tell your father," Tom said as they finally packed up their picnic and prepared to ride back. "Pa already knows," Temperance replied with a small smile. "Or at least he suspects. He asked me last week if you'd proposed yet, and when I said no, he just nodded and said, 'Well, the good ones sometimes need a little time to gather their courage.'" Tom laughed, both embarrassed and pleased. "Smart man, your father." "He is," Temperance agreed, mounting her horse with practiced ease. "And he thinks highly of you, which matters to me." The ride back to town was filled with plans and possibilities, the future stretching before them full of promise. By the time they reached the blacksmith shop, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Russell was waiting on the porch, pipe in hand, his expression unsurprised as they dismounted and approached hand in hand, Temperance's ring catching the last light of day. "Well," he asked, though the question was clearly rhetorical. "Mr. Aldridge," Tom began formally, "I've asked Temperance to marry me, and she's done me the great honor of accepting. I'd like to ask for your blessing." The older man puffed on his pipe for a moment, regarding them with twinkling eyes. Then he stood and extended his hand to Tom. "You have it, son, though I reckon you'd have married with or without it." "We would have preferred with," Temperance said, stepping forward to embrace her father. Russell returned the hug with gruff affection. "Well then, I suppose we'd better come inside and discuss wedding plans. Martha Henderson's been storing a trunk of your mother's things for just such an occasion, Temp, including her wedding dress, if you've a mind to wear it." Temperance's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "I'd like that very much, Pa." The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy ones for both Tom and Temperance. The small ranch Tom had set his sights on was secured with a handshake and the exchange of papers at the county seat. It consisted of a modest two-room cabin, a barn in need of some repair, and about 80 acres of land, half of it good grazing pasture. the rest rocky terrain suitable mainly for the hardy pinyon pines that dotted the landscape. While Tom divided his time between his duties at the Thompson Ranch and preparations at their future home, Temperance continued helping her father at the smithy while also readying herself for marriage. Martha Henderson, the town's unofficial keeper of traditions, took Temperance under her wing, helping her alter her mother's wedding gown and dispensing advice both practical and personal about married life. The wedding was set for mid-October, when the worst of summer's heat had passed, but before winter's chill descended on the high desert. The entire town of Hawthorne turned out for the occasion, the small church filled to overflowing with well-wishers. Temperance was a vision in her mother's gown, altered to fit her taller frame but retaining the delicate lace and pearl details that had been fashionable when Russell and Alina Aldridge had married 23 years earlier. Tom, standing at the altar in a new suit purchased specifically for the occasion, felt his breath catch in his throat when she appeared at the church entrance on her father's arm. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt, the elderly Reverend Phillips leading them through their vows with dignity and warmth. When Tom slipped the gold band that would accompany her engagement ring onto Temperance's finger, his hands were steady, his heart full to bursting with love and certainty. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared, his voice carrying to the far corners of the church. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and lively, with food contributed by nearly every household in Hawthorne and music provided by the same local band that had played at the social, where Tom and Temperance had shared their first dance. They danced again now as husband and wife, moving together with a harmony that seemed to symbolize the partnership they were embarking upon. As the evening wore on, various townspeople approached to offer congratulations and advice. Samuel Thompson, surprisingly genial after several glasses of whiskey, presented them with a wedding gift that left both speechless: a bill of sale for firecracker. "The beast only behaves for Temperance anyway," he explained gruffly. "Consider it an investment in your future endeavors. I expect you'll be breeding and training horses on that new spread of yours, and he's got good bloodlines, whatever his temperament." "Mr. Thompson, that's incredibly generous," Tom managed, genuinely moved by the unexpected gift. "Yes, well," Thompson harumphed, clearly uncomfortable with displays of sentiment. "Just make sure I get first pick of any foals he sires. And Jenkins, you're welcome to stay on as foreman until you get your place properly established, part-time if necessary." The offer was another unexpected kindness, one that would provide them with a steady income while they built their ranch. Tom accepted gratefully, clapping his now former employer on the shoulder in a rare moment of familiarity. Later, as the celebration began to wind down, Russell approached the couple, his expression a mixture of joy and wistfulness. "Your mother would be proud," he told Temperance, his voice rough with emotion. "She always said you'd find your own path, and by God you have." Temperance embraced her father tightly. "I wish she could be here. She is, in a way," Russell replied, touching the lace at her sleeve gently. "And she'd approve of your choice, Temp. Tom's a good man." "The best," she agreed, smiling up at her new husband. Russell cleared his throat, visibly gathering himself. "Now, I've had the wagon packed since this morning. Everything you'll need for tonight is at the cabin. I'll bring Penny and Diablo out tomorrow, along with the rest of your things, Temp." Tom had spent the previous week making the cabin habitable, fixing the roof, replacing broken windows, building a sturdy bed frame, and hauling in a new mattress from Carson City. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, sound, and most importantly, theirs. They departed the celebration amid cheers and well wishes, climbing into the wagon that would take them to their new home. As they drove through the quiet streets of Hawthorne and out onto the open road, Temperance leaned against Tom's shoulder, contentment radiating from her. "Happy, Mrs. Jenkins?" he asked, still marveling at the sound of her new name. Happier than I ever thought possible, she replied, tilting her face up for a kiss that he gladly provided. The cabin was visible from some distance as they approached, a single lamp glowing in the window Russell's doing, ensuring they wouldn't arrive to a cold, dark house. As Tom halted the wagon in the yard, the familiar whicker of a horse greeted them from the barn. "Is that?" Temperance began, sitting up straighter. Tom grinned. "Firecracker. I brought him out this morning before the wedding, thought he should be here to welcome you home." Temperance's delight was palpable as she hopped down from the wagon without waiting for assistance. "Oh, Tom." He followed more sedately, watching as she hurried to the barn to greet the stallion. By the time he reached them, Temperance was already in the stall, stroking Firecracker's gleaming neck as the horse nuzzled her shoulder affectionately. "He's settling in well," Tom observed, leaning on the stall door. "I think he knows this is home now." Temperance looked around the small but sturdy barn, then back at him, her eyes shining. "It is, isn't it? Our home." "Our home," Tom agreed, extending his hand to her. "Come inside, wife. I want to show you the rest of it." The cabin was simple but comfortable, with the main room serving as kitchen and living area, a smaller bedroom off to one side. Tom had stocked the pantry with basics, and even managed to procure a few small luxuries: real coffee, some preserves, a bottle of decent whiskey. A fire was laid in the hearth, waiting only for a match to bring warmth and light to their first evening as husband and wife. As night deepened around their new home, Tom and Temperance began their married life with the same honesty and tenderness that had characterized their courtship. In the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered each other anew, their union as natural and right as their partnership in all other aspects of life. Later, lying together in the quiet darkness, listening to the night sounds of their land, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of wind through pinyon pines, Tom felt a contentment so profound it bordered on disbelief. "What are you thinking?" Temperance murmured, her head resting on his chest. "That I'm the luckiest man in Nevada," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Maybe in the whole country," she laughed softly. "We're both fortunate to have found each other, to have this place, this chance to build something together. When I first saw you breaking that wild horse, I never imagined we'd end up here," Tom admitted. "No." Temperance raised herself on one elbow, looking down at him in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. "What did you imagine, honestly?" "I was just trying not to let my jaw hit the ground from watching you work. I'd never seen anything like it." She smiled, touching his face gently. "And now I know that was just the beginning of all the ways you'd amaze me," Tom said, drawing her down for a kiss that expressed what words could not. The years that followed were not without challenges, as was true for any ranching venture in the harsh Nevada landscape. Droughts tested their resources, harsh winters threatened their livestock, and the economic vagaries of the cattle and horse markets required constant adaptation and innovation. But through it all, the partnership formed that day in the corral when Tom watched in awe as Temperance tamed a horse no man could break, only strengthened and deepened. They built their ranch slowly but surely, establishing a reputation for quality horses trained with Temperance's unique methods. Firecracker, true to Thompson's prediction, sired exceptional foals that combined his impressive bloodlines with more manageable temperaments, thanks to careful breeding and training. Tom continued to work part-time for Thompson for the first 2 years, dividing his energies between the larger ranch and their own growing operation. When Temperance discovered she was expecting their first child, however, he made the decision to focus entirely on their property, expanding their herd and building additional structures as their success and family grew. Their son, Samuel Russell Jenkins, was born in the spring of 1881, a strong, healthy boy with his mother's honey-brown hair and his father's blue eyes. Russell Aldridge, now a proud grandfather, became a frequent visitor to the ranch, often staying for extended periods to help with the blacksmithing needs of their expanding operation, and to dote on his grandson. 3 years later, twins joined the family, Alina and James, completing their household with joyful chaos. Temperance proved to be as natural a mother as she was a horse trainer, approaching both with the same blend of patience, firmness, and boundless love. Tom, watching his wife rock their children to sleep with the same gentle hands that could calm the wildest stallion, fell in love with her anew each day. As the children grew, they too learned the art of horsemanship under their mother's guidance. Young Sam showed a particular affinity for it, able to approach even difficult animals with the same intuitive understanding Temperance possessed. By the time he was 12, he was actively participating in the training of their horses, his natural talent honed by his mother's expert instruction. The Jenkins Ranch, as it came to be known throughout the region, flourished. What had begun as a modest operation with a handful of horses, and a dream expanded to include over 200 acres, several well-constructed outbuildings, and a reputation that drew buyers from as far away as California and Colorado. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful day when Temperance had tamed Diablo while Tom watched from the fence, they stood together on the porch of their home, no longer a simple 2-room cabin, but a comfortable house that had grown with their family and prosperity. The ranch stretched before them, horses grazing peacefully in the evening light, their children playing in the yard, the life they had built together manifest in every direction they looked. Did you ever imagine this? Tom asked, his arm around his wife's waist, echoing her question from their wedding night. Temperance leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. Not in detail, but I always knew there was something special waiting for me. I just had to be patient enough to find it. Like breaking a wild horse, Tom observed with a smile. Exactly like that, she agreed, turning to face him. You have to recognize the potential, then work with what's there, not against it, whether it's a horse or a life. Tom brushed a strand of hair from her face, noting the few threads of silver that had begun to appear among the honey brown. To him, she was more beautiful now than she had been that first day, her beauty deepened by experience, by joy and sorrow shared, by the life they had forged together. I love you, Temperance Jenkins, he said simply. And I love you, Thomas Jenkins, she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as the sun set behind the mountains and another day in their extraordinary ordinary life came to a close. Always have, since the moment you looked at me with awe instead of doubt, and always will. In the distance, Diablo, now a venerable old stallion enjoying a well-earned retirement, nickered softly to his longtime companion Firecracker as they grazed side by side, their initial wildness tempered by years of trust and care, much like the love between the woman who had tamed them and the man who had watched in wonder, recognizing in that moment the beginning of something rare and precious beyond measure. As twilight deepened into night, the Jenkins family gathered in their home, the laughter of children mingling with the quiet conversation of a couple whose love had only grown stronger with each passing year. Outside, the Nevada stars emerged one by one, bearing witness to the continuing story of a wild horse, a remarkable woman, and the man who had been wise enough to recognize, from his perch on a fence so many years ago, that he was witnessing not just an impressive feat of horsemanship, but the first chapter of the rest of his life.